This is the 𝙎𝙬𝘾𝙄𝑼𝙇𝙎 V4 brake set, and it's changed the way that I think about brakes forever. There's a lot to love about these monster brakes on paper. They promise both incredible power and excellent modulation in an aesthetically pleasing and highly adjustable package. But they're also surprisingly different on trail compared to everything else on the market, and they certainly won't be for everyone. Today we're going to dig into all of the quirks of the most interesting brakes I've reviewed to date, including of course 𝙎𝙬's 3.3mm thick vented rotors. There's a lot to cover today, so let's get into it. I purchased this set of 𝙎𝙬 brakes from the Canadian distributor NRG at a slight discount. I'd like to thank Will, the NRG rep that I spoke with, for being very knowledgeable and helpful when it came to this purchase. Although you, the viewer, cannot directly purchase from NRG, INBI can and frequently does so, so it's best to reach out through them instead. I have no professional affiliation with either 𝙎𝙬 or NRG, and neither them nor INBI have any say as to the content of this video. Everything said in this video is my opinion, and I am not receiving any monetary or in-kind compensation for this review. Videos like this one take a lot of time and money to produce, so if you'd like to support my honest and independent reviews, then Patreon is the best place to do that. All of my Patreon members get early access to my videos, including this one, and I've set up 5 different tiers corresponding to different levels of support with increasing perks for each. One of these perks includes access to the interactive and weighted Dale scale spreadsheet. This spreadsheet has annotated comments for every single score, providing a quick and convenient reference for all of my reviews, along with the ability to weight each of the 10 categories relative to your own purchasing criteria. I also plan on running Q&As, gear polls, and releasing a few exclusive ad-free raw riding videos. If you'd like to learn more or support what I do, I left the link to my Patreon account in the video description, and I'd like to thank all of my current members for helping make these videos possible. 𝙎𝙬 Technology is proudly located in 𝙎𝙘𝑠𝑤ick in the United Kingdom, a small town of just over 11,000 people, just far enough north that I sometimes need to turn on closed captions. 𝙎𝙬 began in 1985 as IPCO, when founders Ian and Simon left Rolls-Royce Aerospace to form their own company making jigs and fixtures for the aerospace industry. Unhappy with the cantilever brakes on their personal bikes, they began to manufacture cable-actuated disc brakes in 1989 for themselves and close friends in their spare time. These were obviously a hit, and 𝙎𝙬 Technology was then founded in 1991, with their mechanical disc brake being their first product to market. In 1994, long before I was born, 𝙎𝙬 launched their first hydraulic brake at Eurobike that was allegedly a hit among pro riders on the downhill circuit. This means that 𝙎𝙬 has over 30 years of experience designing hydraulic disc brakes for mountain bikes, making them a significant player in this category. All this information comes from 𝙎𝙬's fantastic About Us pages, plural, that are definitely worth a quick read. According to Google Street View, 𝙎𝙬 certainly has the coolest looking factory, and it doesn't look like that's much of a competition either. 𝙎𝙬 does an excellent job of showcasing their employees through the videos and articles on their website, and they genuinely seem to be a pretty fantastic place to work. And they mentioned their Ride to Work scheme, whereby each member of staff is entitled to a bike of their choice, fully decorated in the latest 𝙎𝙬 components. Who better to test the products than the people who make them? 𝙎𝙬 also has a fantastic sustainability page that is proudly linked on the footer of every page. Although the formatting screams Yahoo GeoCities circa 1999, the content on this page is impressive, and 𝙎𝙬 clearly outlines concrete ways that they're actively making a difference. 𝙎𝙬 mentions that everything we do is made to last, tested to destruction in foul conditions, with durability and serviceability at heart. And they have a fantastic reputation as far as serviceability and right to repair initiatives go. Their documentation is incredible, both for routine maintenance and teardown style servicing, and goes back to brakes almost as old as I am, with hand-drafted exploded diagrams. 𝙎𝙬 guarantees the availability of spare parts for a minimum of 10 years after final production, parts that are clearly identified on all of their exploded diagrams. They even claim to still have spares available for their original disc brakes. 𝙎𝙬 offers an industry standard 2-year warranty on all of their brakes, a process that most people have seemed to have good things to say about online. 𝙎𝙬's brake tech book is by far the best in the business and covers any question you could ever have about any of their brakes, including detailed troubleshooting, setup, and maintenance guides, along with 3D printable tools that help optimize the setup process. The only point I disagree with in this otherwise phenomenal book is their claim that a mineral oil system requires more maintenance and has reduced performance and reliability during hard use, since many companies have released brakes that fairly easily disprove this logic. They also mention their local advocacy efforts, metal and cardboard recycling programs, and a 160 kilowatt solar panel installation on their factory roof for their presumably 6 to 8 sunny days a year. 𝙎𝙬 also claims to make all of their parts in the state-of-the-art 𝙎𝙘𝑠𝑤ick factory, running 24/7 with almost 100 staff. Now, I could easily make an entire video about 𝙎𝙬, including where they hypothesize filling your brake lines with beer, but I think they are best summed up by the quote on their homepage, where they mention, "Our ethos is simple. We make high-quality products, no sales waffle. Let the products do the talking." Combine that with an industry-leading right to repair stance, a history of standing behind their products, and a clear environmental and sustainability plan, I am unable to think of a company that I would rather give my money to. Hope earns a perfect 10 out of 10 in the new Ethos category, something that holds a lot of value in my purchasing decisions and product recommendations. Now, Hope launched this Tech 4 V4 brake set back in March of 2022, sort of, making them 3 years old as of this video. Now, Tech 4 refers to the lever and V4 refers to the caliper, so let's start with the caliper first. The V4 is Hope's largest and most aggressive caliper, sporting two 18mm pistons and two 16mm pistons, along with being compatible with Hope's proprietary 3.3mm thick vented rotors, although you don't have to use them. According to this chart from Hope's website, the V4 caliper was originally launched back in 2013, although it has surely seen a handful of running changes in the last 12 years. The E4 is a slightly less aggressive caliper with four 16mm pistons, and is compatible only with the standard thickness of rotors. The X2 is Hope's two-piston mountain bike caliper. The Tech 4 lever is Hope's axial lever design, and is paired with all three of these calipers for different intended uses, and replaces the previous gen Tech 3 lever. The Tech 4 lever was launched in 2022 according to the same chart. Hope also offers a radial XCR lever that can be paired with either their X2 or E4 but not V4 calipers at a slightly reduced intended use. This means that Hope offers 5 different mountain bike brake sets through this mixing and matching strategy. Hope also offers a Tech 3 duo brake, where both calipers are controlled independently by a single master cylinder with 2 lever blades, which is a very cool and accessible option that I've heard great things about. Now, if you aren't sure which brake is right for you, Hope has a brake selection guide on their website that helps recommend a brake set and rotor size depending on your weight and intended riding terrain. Because I'm quite a light rider, I definitely waffled between trying the E4 or the V4 first, but Hope's suggestion of, if in doubt, always pick the most powerful option, what can do more, can do less, is what ultimately pushed me over the edge toward the V4s. The Tech 4 V4 retails for 480 Brexits with standard black hoses, which is approximately 628 executive orders or 853 Canadian. If you want the fancy braided hoses, you'll be looking at about 20 Boruses more, 26 Freedoms or 36 Canadian. Hope's tech book claims that there is no difference in ride performance between these two hoses, but that the braided hose will likely be less prone to damage while being transported or handled. The V4s are available in both black and silver primary colorways, with accents available in black, silver, purple, red, blue, orange, or green. I chose to go with green because that's Hope's official color, and it appears to be either a newer edition or quite rare, given that it isn't listed on their website yet. The Tech 4 levers are unfortunately side-specific and would have to be replaced in kind in the event of a crash or other damage. The lever blades also happen to pull quite far away from the center line of the handlebar, and not in the direction that you would expect either, which is very interesting. We'll get into the build quality a bit later on, but I think that the Tech 4 V4s are the best looking brakes available on the market today. I've mentioned this opinion to several people throughout my testing, and nobody outright disagreed, though a few people did mention that their personal preference is for the older Tech 3 lever. The Tech 4 lever has a very mechanical aesthetic with an exceptionally long and square lever blade, and 2 adjustment dials proudly displayed in your chosen accent color. This branding and anodization strikes a great balance between subtlety and functionality, especially with the silver primary colorway, and the 1-bolt hinged bar clamp is well integrated to the overall design. The V4 caliper looks every bit as strong as it performs, and although somebody may have gone a bit overboard on the CNC pathway, it really fits the vibe that Hope has gone for here. The orange copper crush washers, that's a tongue twister, are a neat touch from outside the bike industry and help round off the industrial design nicely. I think they're nearly perfect, but this is not a unanimous opinion, so I'm going to score the Tech 4 V4s at a 9 out of 10 for their bold, intentional, and unapologetically functional styling, combined with an impressive range of 14 color combinations for the ultimate personalized touch. These brakes also have an above average level of adjustability. The Tech 4 lever sports 2 toolless adjustment dials for both reach and bite point control. The reach adjustment dial sports an impressive range, one that is required for its function, although I wish the gaps between each click were about half the size for a more refined adjustment. The bite point control dial has a small but noticeable effect, and I've always found myself preferring the extreme position that minimized the lever dead stroke as much as possible. It's worth noting that there is crosstalk between these two adjustments, so if you play with the bite point, you will also have to play with the reach adjustment too. Hope offers direct mount shifter adapters that fit all SRAM and spanner shifters, and the lever design also allows for installation of ring clamp shifters from both brands without any risk of interference. The Tech 4 has a notably long lever blade, which requires the bar clamp to sit further inboard than you may be used to, although I did not find this to be an issue and I had no issues getting a comfortable shifter position. The hinge bar clamp uses a single hex bolt for quick and convenient adjustments and can be easily installed or removed without having to adjust other bits on your cockpit. I never had it slip while riding at its prescribed torque either. further. The V4 calipers fittingly use 𝙎𝙬𝙾𝙬𝙍𝙎 V4 brake pad standard. Although not quite as prominent as SRAM or Shimano pad shapes, the V4 pad shape is well supported and used by a number of other brands including Trickstuff, Lewis, and 612. 𝙎𝙬𝙾 produces V4 brake pads in 4 different brake pad compounds that conveniently correspond to different colors, shown here by this handy chart on their website. I'm more and more convinced that their website was designed by an engineer. 𝙎𝙬𝙾 includes 3 of these 4 compounds in the box, being their green, red, and purple options. Typically, I find myself gravitating towards sintered metallic brake pads when they're available, which would be the gold option, although I've heard a lot of people rave about 𝙎𝙬𝙾's racing green pads, so I had to give them a try here as they're claimed to be the highest braking power of all of the options. The V4s are also compatible with 𝙎𝙬𝙾's vented rotors, which measure a whopping 3.3mm thick and look like you mounted 2 discs to each hub. These rotors are a work of art, and are available in a range of colors in both 203mm and 220mm diameters. Since these rotors were so highly requested, and since I received a generous discount on them, I couldn't say no to giving them a shot for this test. These vented rotors are unfortunately only offered in a 6-bolt configuration, and I chose to run them with a center lock adapter since I have center lock wheel sets. Usually this is not a recommended setup, although I couldn't find anything on 𝙎𝙬𝙾's, DT Swiss's, or Onyx's website that would prohibit the usage of this adapter. Your mileage may vary here. 𝙎𝙬𝙾's claim is that these vented rotors offer a 15% reduction in heat buildup compared to their floating rotors, and offer consistent braking performance in wet conditions, thanks to their capability to clear water through its fins. Now this performance comes at a price. The first price is weight, with the single 203mm rotor coming in at 288 grams, which is more than 40% heavier than a SRAM HS2 rotor. The other price is monetary, with a set of 2 vented rotors costing 270 Yorkshire puddings, 353 broligarchies, or 480 Canadian dollars for 2 rotors. If you don't fancy putting up that kind of money for a pair of brake rotors, the V4s are also compatible with 𝙎𝙬𝙾's standard 1.8mm thick floating rotors, or 2.3mm thick fixed rotors too. It's worth noting that the braided stainless steel hose option appears to have a 5.0mm outer diameter, meaning you are less likely to encounter any compatibility issues with internally routed frames. Overall, the Tech 4 V4s offer an excellent range of adjustability, scoring an 8 out of 10 in this category, held back mostly by their lack of a leverage ratio adjustment feature that is present on the Lewis flagships. Now, moving on to build quality, and the 𝙎𝙬𝙾s continue to deliver. The calipers are a masterclass in G-code execution, with not a single tool path askew or scratch to speak of. I'm not a fan of the wire-style cotter pin used to secure the brake pad retention bolt, as it's a bit of a pain to install or remove, but I can't deny that it does its job. The levers are also very well made, with high-quality materials used throughout, and no perceptible play in the lever blade pivot. The lever blades have a dimpled texture machined right where your finger would sit that does a perfect job of increasing grip with or without gloves in the wet, cold, or sweaty conditions. There are only 3 points worth noting as far as build quality goes, and all of them happen to be on the lever side. The first is that all 4 toolless adjustment dials required a back and forth chip cutting style rotation before they had a smooth actuation. They were still usable, but considerably stiffer than I'd expect out of the box. The second is that the hex nut on the underside of the lever looks very out of place in an otherwise very well integrated design. I know of one rider who had this nut fall off while riding, and it was not immediately obvious which was the original and which was the hardware store replacement once I saw that in person. And the final point relates to the color that I've selected. Green is a notoriously hard color to anodize, one of the hardest from my understanding in aluminum, and is likely the reason that they're not currently listed on 𝙎𝙬𝙾's websites. All of the green accents present on my brakes are a slightly but noticeably different shade of green, and that is evident even when they are on opposite sides of the bike from one another. I have no doubt that the other colorways are more consistent, and as such I will not dock a point here, and I hope that 𝙎𝙬𝙀 continues to offer green into the future with an asterisk beside it. Overall, the V4s get an 8 out of 10 for their excellent build quality, and they only have minor room for improvement. The energy rep that I purchased these from mentioned that if I did not have previous experience with bleeding 𝙎𝙬𝙀 brakes, that I should probably take them into a qualified dealer, as their process is a bit different from most. So that's exactly what I did. I brought them down to MB Bikes and requested the expert assistance of my favorite British mechanic, who was certified to bleed 𝙎𝙬𝙀 brakes back in elementary school, believe it or not. The Tech 4 V4s use .5.1 fluid, which is not a big issue if the bleeding process is relatively clean. Both brakes arrived with 2-meter long hoses, presumably because 𝙎𝙬𝙀's domestic market stubbornly refuses to run their brakes the right way around, so both brakes had to be trimmed and bled accordingly. 𝙎𝙬𝙀 has an excellent bleeding documentation available online, which we followed to the letter, and which includes the following beautiful and mandatory step executed to perfection by Ben here. Yes, that is a copious amount of toxic dot fluid pouring out from all sides of the reservoir as the diaphragm is reinstalled. How this step is something that people accept in 2025 absolutely blows my mind, and I could totally see this being a deal breaker for many riders. I'd be mildly annoyed if this was mineral oil, but it isn't. It's more toxic and needs to be cleaned up extra thoroughly after bleeding your brakes. If Hope only changes one thing about their Tech 5 levers, it needs to be this step. The bleeding process was otherwise unremarkable and appeared to be relatively straightforward with the use of Hope's proprietary bleeding funnel and adapter plate. Hope was on track to score another perfect score in the serviceability category with their incredible right to repair advocacy and excellent servicing documentation, until this lovely, perfectly consistent step with absolutely no opportunities for error appeared in the process. I also encountered some bleed consistency issues throughout my testing, likely related to this step, so I'm scoring these at a 7 out of 10 for serviceability, with a look of disappointment and a head shake for what could have easily been a perfect 10. And now it's finally time to talk about the Tech 4 V-Force performance. For many people, Hope's failed the parking lot squeeze test. If you've only ever ridden brakes from the big two, namely SRAM and Shimano, you will be quick to call the Hope spongy or vague upon your first squeeze. This was a surprisingly common sentiment in person, where people's initial reaction was often quite negative when they initially squeezed these levers while the bike was stationary. But as soon as anyone rode the bike, even so much as pedaling it around the parking lot, they quickly realized that there's a lot more than meets the eye. Hope's biggest weakness is that these brakes are so different from normal brakes, to the point where first impressions are almost irrelevant if you have no prior experience with Hope brakes before. Now, I'm someone who loves testing new products and learning new skills, especially brakes, and I have extensive experience on over 20 different brake sets, and even I could not get used to the V4s on my first 3-hour ride. I found them to be very powerful, but also very unintuitive and tricky to get the reach dialed into my preference with the coarse detents on the adjustment dial. I was constantly thinking about these brakes as I was riding, as I'd always worried that I'd either pull too much or too little, to the point where it was actually slowing down my riding. However, the performance was extremely consistent on this first ride, so I figured that I probably just needed more time to get properly acquainted with these brakes, and toward the end of my second ride, after about 1500 meters of total descending, everything clicked. These brakes are amazing. Now, let's attempt to explain how everything clicked for me. The Tech 4 lever has an incredibly light lever action. The dead stroke force required is down there with the lightest that I've ever tried, which is exactly what I want to see in a performance-focused product that goes a long way toward reducing rider fatigue. The Tech 4 lever doesn't just have a light dead stroke though, it stays very light throughout the entire range of power. This is of course a very good thing, and it means that the V4 is one of, if not the most powerful brakes on the market at all points on its power curve. Enduro magazine ran a laboratory test that partly confirmed this last year, although unfortunately they only measured every brake at a standardized 40 newtons of force on the lever, rather than sampling several different forces that would generate a much more useful complete curve. What they did is definitely a great start, but it's a little bit too German to assume that one will always apply exactly 40.0 newtons of force to the lever in every situation, and it discredits the importance of a light dead stroke when it comes to low speed, precise and accurate modulation. Regardless, the Tech 4 V-Force are incredibly powerful, and I struggle to imagine any rider or trail that they would not be able to slow down. But they are almost too light, and shockingly different from every other brand on the force curve, so we need to look for something else to click. Thankfully, there is somewhere we can look, and that would be the lever blade throw. The Tech 4 levers have the longest throw that I have ever seen when a normal amount of force is applied, like a SRAM or Shimano lever, even quite a bit further than its proportionally longer lever blade would imply. Even if you are not a particularly heavy rider who enjoys riding moderately steep trails, you'll have to use the reach adjustment dial to move the levers quite a bit farther away from your grips in their natural resting position in order for them to be a familiar distance away from your grips under maximum squeezing power. It genuinely feels like the distance the lever travels from initial bite to maximum power is twice what it is on any other brake. And therein lies the secret to getting used to Hope brakes. Instead of thinking about how much force you're applying to the lever, you should think about where the lever is in its stroke. It's not about force-based feedback, it's position-based feedback. On my first ride, I found myself braking way too little and way too late, coming into corners hotter and significantly faster than I would have liked. It had absolutely nothing to do with how hard I was squeezing, I just simply wasn't pulling the levers far enough. Now, this change will not happen instantly, and it will likely take you a few rides to acclimate, but the moment that you truly understand this change in mindset is the moment that these brakes truly become magical. The long lever throw also has another benefit, and that is excellent modulation. Combined with the low lever force required, it is very easy to make micro adjustments in braking power by moving the lever just a millimeter or two at a time. You can easily find and hover around the limit of traction with these brakes, making them a great choice for racing. They're also very consistent during regular riding, and they are equally intuitive to use on slow speed, lower force tech moves too. Dare I say that their combination of power and modulation make them the best brakes for slabs and rock rolls that I have ever tested. The only neutral point about their performance is that the consistently low force and long lever result in a relatively soft feeling bite point. This bite point is very consistent, and never wandered, never faded, and is great for subtle feathering on the steepest of trails. You can pretty easily see why people call these brakes spongy on their first squeeze now. They require very little force to operate, they have a very long lever throw, and a relatively soft bite point. The trifecta of spongy brakes. But the amount of force that the caliper generates make all of those irrelevant on the trail and turn each of these points into noteworthy performance benefits. Ultimately, the Tech 4 V4s are fantastic performers in every situation and deserve a perfect 10 out of 10 in the performance category, with a massive asterisk that they have a steep initial learning curve and will take some time to get used to. On my first ride, I'd probably give them a 3 or a 4, consistent with people's initial reaction, but you cannot judge a book by its cover. It's worth noting that I conducted all of my trail testing with Hope's 3.3mm vented rotors, but I tested a pair of their standard floating rotors back to back in INBI's parking lot on one of the owner's bikes, and it was hard to tell the difference. I have no reason to believe that the V4s would score anything other than perfect with the floating rotors installed too. Now let's talk about consistency. After I installed these brakes, I went on 3 big rides before getting quite sick for a couple of weeks. Both brakes were perfectly consistent over these 3 rides. The bike was then stored in a vertical orientation for 2 weeks, and when I returned, the rear brake lever pulled straight to the bar without producing any power, and the front, although usable, had clearly also gotten some air in the line. Hope brakes have a bit of a reputation for being notoriously difficult to get a consistent bleed on, so despite us following all of the steps verbatim the first time, I took the bike back to INBI and we bled both brakes again. On the second bleed, a surprising amount of air was removed, and then both brakes felt fantastic and consistent for another 4 rides. Thanks again to INBI Bikes for their continued support of my channel. Then everything became covered in snow, so I hung up the bike vertically for close to 4 weeks this time, and when I returned, the front brake now pulled to the bar, and the rear brake was not perfect either. Hope claims that you could, not should, bleed your brakes every couple of years for beneficial results, but my guess is that it's nearly impossible to perform the step where you messily put the reservoir cap back on the lever without introducing some amount of air into the reservoir, and when hung vertically, the air rises into the hoses that are higher than the levers. I wish that this process was a lot more consistent, and I have full confidence that with a perfect bleed, it would remain excellent for years to come. But that seems like a relatively difficult thing to achieve compared to every other brake that I've tried. I now understand why people complain about bleeding Hope brakes, and I'm not a big fan either of gambling on what the levers are going to do every time I take the bike out of storage. This is why they scored a 7 out of 10 for serviceability. Do yourself a favor and take these to a professional to bleed, and prepare yourself to have to return at least once. Assuming you do have a high quality bleed though, there are only a few points worth noting. The first is that these brakes had a tendency to rub and produced a high-pitched squeal on the climbs or any low-speed pedaling. This seemed to become more frequent in freezing temperatures, and it didn't seem to matter how well centered the rotors were or what rotors you were using on a given trail. I never noticed any abnormal noises while descending, but take a listen to some of the climbs. Many people online mention that they don't love the shape of the lever blade itself, calling it too flat or too square. Now, I fully expected to be one of these people given my dainty phalanges, but I ended up really liking this profile. The dimples do a great job at increasing finger grip in wet and sweaty conditions, and the square profile does a great job at lowering the surface pressure on your braking fingers. Unfortunately, it's not the easiest to put the lever blade in your preferred position, since the reach adjustment dial has very large steps between detents. I also wish that the bite point control dial did a little bit more, but I also understand that Lewis has spoiled us with the impressive adjustment range on their premium brakes. Once you have everything dialed in, including your mindset, the Tech 4 V4s are perfectly invisible on the descents and earn a solid 8 out of 10 in the invisibility category, held back by annoyances while climbing. For innovation, it's tough not to admire what Hope has done here. Hope has designed and manufactured a premium brake in the UK that provides incredible power and excellent modulation, all at a price that slightly undercuts the Maven Ultimate, Code Stealth Ultimate, and Shimano XTR brakes. Hope understands the importance of reducing rider fatigue, and the build quality of these brakes exceeds what is typical at this price point. Hope has certainly set a new benchmark for me with these Tech 4 V4s, but since they don't make everything else obsolete, they earn a 9 out of 10 for innovation. Now, there's only so much I can assess in terms of reliability over my short-term testing, but reports online indicate that these are quite reliable in the spectrum of mountain bike brakes. Many people have broken various parts over the years, of course, the most common appearing to be the lever blade itself on crashes on the trail. Both of my issues, rotor noise and consistent bleed difficulty, are not reliability related, so they are captured in the scores of other categories. These brakes have been out for just over 3 years now in this configuration, and since there appear to be no systemic issues that stem from design or manufacturing, I'm going to score them at an 8 out of 10 for excellent reliability. And now it's time to talk about value. Let's start with the rotors. 𝙎𝙬𝙾𝙬𝙬𝙍 vented rotors are no doubt very cool. They're the best looking rotors ever in my opinion, and they probably offer marginally better performance for the heaviest riders in the wettest conditions. And the rivets even make tinging noises when cooling off like a combustion engine would. But it's really hard to ignore the fact that they cost 480 Canadian smackaroos for a pair of rotors, and they're only compatible with 𝙎𝙬's V4 calipers. If they had a longer wear life than a standard pair of rotors, then I'd be more open to the idea, but 𝙎𝙬 recommends that they are replaced after a 0.4mm reduction in thickness, compared to a 0.8mm reduction in thickness for their much cheaper 2.3mm fixed rotors. These fancy vented rotors felt very similar in the parking lot to 𝙎𝙬's normal floating rotors too, making them objectively bad value, and you shouldn't be buying $480 worth of consumables if you know what the word budget means. I'll probably still keep using them myself though. The Tech4 V4 brakes themselves are a completely different story. They do everything well on the trail, they come in a rainbow of fun colors, and they offer unmatched performance for those looking for both modulation and power. 𝙎𝙬's commitment to long-term product support goes a long way in this category. You don't just buy these brakes for a season, you buy them for a decade, and they are one of very few parts that will go with you from bike to bike to bike. 𝙎𝙬 claims that there is no difference in performance between the stainless steel braided hoses and the standard hoses, only that they are slightly more durable, so it's up to you if this upgrade is worth the small upcharge. The Tech4 V4s aren't perfect, but they are great at everything and the best in certain categories, giving them a 9 out of 10 in the value category. Add them all up and the total is 86 out of 100, which places them here against all the other brakes that I have significant experience with. The Dale scale officially has a new top dog today. The Tech4 V4s are unlike anything I've tried before, and I genuinely cannot recommend these brakes enough. I've even purchased another set for a secret new bike that I'm working on, but they also certainly aren't for everyone. If you're looking for something familiar, then you should probably look elsewhere. The long lever throw takes some time to get used to, and you'll have to learn some new skills in the bleeding department, but those who persist will be rewarded with greatness. If you don't care about adjustability, the Intend Trinities score slightly higher than the V4s due to their mindlessly easy and consistent bleed process. The Trinities have a more normal lever throw and a more firmly defined bite point, only at the expense of the V4's perfect modulation for slabs and rock rolls and 𝙎𝙬's commitment to long-term service parts. The Trinities are also nearly $400 more expensive and extremely difficult to obtain. In my opinion, there are no other brakes on this list that are worth comparing the Tech4 V4s to. They are simply that different, and there is a reason that they've won so many awards over the years. My new default recommendation is the Tech4 V4s with standard hoses and fixed rotors. Now I'd like to send a little message to the 𝙎𝙬 team directly. Dear 𝙎𝙬, thank you. But you have a marketing problem, not an engineering problem. Apart from the highly questionable bleed process that I really hope you fix with the Tech 5 levers, these brakes are truly amazing, and it's criminal how small your market share is here in North America. Most riders only have experience with SRAM or Shimano brakes because that's what OEMs like to spec, and people's familiarity with how a brake is supposed to feel starts you off at a significant disadvantage. This means that for most people, the Tech4 V4s will never be an intuitive brake initially, and they're not going to help sell a bike on the showroom floor quite like a Maven will. As you know, it's not worth going the OEM route if you aren't made in Asia anyways, and I don't think you'll see success with a demo fleet partnership either. What you need is a small lineup of open-minded, technologically literate ambassadors who understand social media. Give out brake sets to riders with significant followings for free, and give them a service credit to get them properly set up at a qualified shop. Once these key riders experience the magic behind your brakes by actually getting familiar with them, rather than dismissing them as mushy when squeezing their friend set in the parking lot, their audiences will surely follow. This is basically what 𝙎𝙬's did with their Dominions, a brake that was rarely seen in the wild for its first 4 years of production, and look at how popular they are these days, and for good reason. I love what you stand for, 𝙎𝙬, especially the sustainability first ethos, and I hope that you see the same success here. My inbox is always open, and thanks for watching.